The fluorescent lights of Camp Pendleton's mess hall cast harsh shadows across Elena Vasquez's face as she sat alone at the corner table, methodically eating her regulation breakfast. At 28, she possessed the kind of unremarkable presence that made people's eyes slide past her without truly seeing. Her slight frame barely filled out the standard-issue uniform, and her dark hair was pulled back in the most regulation bun possible, neat, tight, and forgettable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had mastered the art of invisibility during her 18 months at Camp Pendleton. She arrived early, left late, and spoke only when directly addressed. Her duties as a supply clerk in Building 47 were mundane by design. Inventory management, requisition processing, and endless paperwork that kept the base running but earned no recognition. While other Marines sought advancement and glory, Elena seemed content to fade into the administrative machinery of military life. The mess hall buzzed with the usual morning chatter, Marines discussing weekend plans, complaining about upcoming inspections, and sharing gossip from their various units. Elena listened without participating, her attention focused on the stack of supply reports she'd brought with her. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her personnel file claimed, a competent but unremarkable Marine whose highest aspiration was maintaining accurate inventory counts. What they couldn't see beneath her standard-issue uniform was a small, intricate tattoo positioned just below her left collarbone. The design was deceptively simple, a golden eagle clutching an olive branch and arrows, surrounded by 13 stars arranged in a precise circle. To the untrained eye, it might have been mistaken for patriotic body art or a family military tribute, but to those few who knew what to look for, it represented something far more significant. The Presidential Unit Citation, the highest honor that could be bestowed upon an entire military unit for extraordinary heroism in action. Elena had received that tattoo during a ceremony that officially never happened, alongside 23 other members of Task Force Crimson, an elite special operations unit that had conducted classified missions in the most dangerous corners of the world. The ink had been applied by a military tattoo artist with the highest security clearance, using a special gold-flecked pigment that would be visible only under specific lighting conditions. It was both a mark of honor and a security measure, allowing members of the unit to identify each other while remaining invisible to outside observers. But Task Force Crimson had been disbanded 2 years ago following a mission in Eastern Europe that had gone catastrophically wrong. Official records stated that the entire unit had been killed in a training accident, their bodies lost in a helicopter crash over the Atlantic. The families had been given folded flags and carefully worded condolence letters. The missions had been classified beyond recognition, buried in archives that would never see daylight. Elena was one of only 3 survivors from that final mission, and she had spent the past 2 years building a new identity as a supply clerk, hoping that anonymity would protect her from the enemies Task Force Crimson had made during their operational years. The transition from elite operative to administrative personnel had been jarring, but it had also been necessary. Too many people wanted the members of Task Force Crimson dead, and being forgotten was the only way to stay alive. Her morning routine at Camp Pendleton was deliberately mundane. She arrived at Building 47 at precisely 0630 hours, unlocked the supply office, and began her daily inventory checks. The other Marines in her unit had long since stopped trying to engage her in conversation beyond work-related necessities. They saw her as competent but boring, reliable but uninspiring, exactly the image she had cultivated. Staff Sergeant Marcus Coleman was different from the others, though Elena couldn't quite pinpoint why. A 15-year veteran with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Coleman had an observer's eye that missed very little. He'd been watching Elena for weeks, noting small details that others overlooked. The way she positioned herself with clear sightlines to exits, how she counted personnel in every room she entered, the precise way she organized her workspace for maximum efficiency. Most telling was her physical conditioning. While Elena dressed to minimize her appearance, Coleman had noticed the lean muscle definition in her forearms, the controlled way she moved, and the calluses on her hands that suggested extensive weapons training. Her personnel file listed her previous assignment as administrative support at Quantico, but Coleman had served long enough to recognize a combat veteran when he saw one. During morning PT sessions, Elena participated with the mechanical precision of someone going through the motions, but Coleman caught glimpses of capabilities she was clearly suppressing. When the unit ran their weekly 3-mile course, Elena stayed in the middle of the pack, breathing easily while others struggled. When they conducted combat training exercises, she demonstrated just enough competency to avoid attention while obviously holding back significant skill. The inconsistencies bothered Coleman because they suggested that Elena Vasquez was not who she claimed to be. Her service record was technically perfect but oddly sparse, lacking the kind of personal details and anecdotal information that typically filled a Marine's file. Her emergency contacts were listed as distant relatives she claimed not to see often. Her medical history showed no significant injuries despite supposedly serving for 6 years. Most suspicious of all, her fingerprints and DNA were not in the standard military databases, a nearly impossible oversight for someone with her claimed service history. The morning that would change everything began like any other. Elena arrived at Building 47 to find a notice posted on the supply office door. Mandatory uniform inspection scheduled for 1,400 hours. All personnel were required to present themselves in dress blues for a surprise inspection by visiting officers from Marine Corps headquarters. Elena felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. Uniform inspections were routine, but they also meant close scrutiny from unfamiliar officers who might recognize details that the regular base personnel missed. She had survived 18 months of anonymity by avoiding exactly this kind of attention. Throughout the morning, Elena went through the motions of her regular duties, while mentally preparing for the inspection. She reviewed her dress uniform for any potential issues, ensured her ribbons and badges were properly arranged, and practiced the kind of unremarkable responses that would help her blend into the group of Marines being inspected. The inspection was scheduled to take place in the main courtyard, where the entire supply unit would be lined up for review. Elena had positioned herself in the third row, hoping to avoid the detailed scrutiny typically reserved for Marines in the front ranks. The visiting officers included a Colonel Patricia Hayes from Marine Corps Intelligence, a Major David Richardson from Personnel Review, and a Sergeant Major Thomas Kelly, whose presence suggested this was more than a routine inspection. Colonel Hayes was a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s whose reputation for identifying discrepancies in personnel files was legendary throughout the Marine Corps. She moved down the ranks with methodical precision, asking pointed questions about service history, deployment records, and career aspirations. When she reached Elena, her examination was initially routine, checking uniform regulations, verifying name tape placement, and reviewing the ribbons on Elena's dress blue jacket. But something caught Colonel Hayes' attention. Perhaps it was the way Elena held herself, too controlled for a supply clerk, too alert for someone with an administrative background. Perhaps it was the slight scarring on Elena's hands that suggested combat experience. Or perhaps it was simply the intuition that came from years of identifying Marines who didn't quite fit their official profiles. Colonel Hayes stepped closer, her examination becoming more intense. She noted the precision of Elena's uniform preparation, the quality of her physical conditioning visible even beneath the formal military attire, and something indefinable about her bearing that suggested experiences beyond supply room management. The moment that changed everything came when Colonel Hayes noticed a small irregularity in the fit of Elena's dress blue jacket around the left shoulder area. The fabric seemed to pull slightly, as if accommodating something beneath the uniform that wasn't supposed to be there. Hayes had seen enough uniform violations to recognize when something was being concealed. Without warning, Colonel Hayes reached for the buttons of Elena's dress blue jacket. Military regulation allowed for uniform inspection to include removal of outer garments if the inspecting officer suspected violations of dress code or concealment of unauthorized items. Elena's training kicked in automatically, the instinct to resist, to protect, to maintain operational security, but she forced herself to remain still as the colonel began unfastening her jacket. Staff Sergeant Coleman watched from his position nearby, noting the tension that suddenly radiated from Elena. Her breathing had changed, becoming more controlled and deliberate. Her hands had moved almost imperceptibly into positions that would allow for quick defensive action. Most telling of all, her eyes had begun scanning the crowd and exits with the systematic precision of someone assessing tactical situations. As Colonel Hayes pulled the dress blue jacket away from Elena's shoulders, she exposed the standard-issue tan undershirt that all Marines wore beneath their formal uniforms. But the colonel's trained eye immediately noticed something wrong with the way the fabric lay across Elena's left shoulder and upper chest area. There was a slight discoloration visible through the thin material, suggesting something underneath that shouldn't be there. Military regulations were clear about unauthorized tattoos, particularly those in visible areas that might be seen when Marines were in physical training gear or other less formal uniforms. Colonel Hayes had uncovered numerous regulation violations during her career, from unauthorized tattoos to concealed piercings to hidden scars that indicated undisclosed medical issues. Without hesitation, Colonel Hayes grasped the neckline of Elena's undershirt and pulled it aside to reveal whatever was being concealed beneath. The movement exposed Elena's left shoulder and upper chest area, revealing what appeared to be a small, professionally done tattoo in an area that would normally be covered by regulation uniforms. But as the afternoon sunlight hit the exposed skin, something extraordinary happened. The tattoo, which had appeared to be simple black ink in the shadows, suddenly revealed its true nature. Under the direct sunlight, gold flecks embedded in the ink began to gleam with unmistakable brilliance, transforming what had seemed like ordinary body art into something far more significant. Colonel Hayes's expression changed from routine inspection mode to shocked recognition as the full design became visible. The golden eagle with its olive branch and arrows, the 13 stars arranged in perfect formation, the craftsmanship that could only come from official military sources, this was not unauthorized body art. This was a presidential unit citation, tattooed with special ink that contained actual gold particles, applied only to members of military units that had performed acts of extraordinary heroism. The courtyard fell silent as Colonel Hayes stared at the tattoo, her military experience immediately recognizing the significance of what she was seeing. Presidential unit citations were not given lightly. They represented the highest level of unit recognition possible, awarded only for actions that went far beyond the call of duty in the face of overwhelming odds. More importantly, the specific design and gold-flecked ink identified this as belonging to a classified unit whose very existence was known only to the highest levels of military command. Staff Sergeant Coleman watched in fascination as Elena's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The woman he had suspected of hiding a significant military background was revealing herself to be something far more extraordinary than he had imagined. The presidential unit citation on her skin told a story of service that went beyond anything in her official personnel file. Elena stood perfectly still as the recognition dawned on the faces around her. She had spent 2 years building a life of anonymity, carefully constructing an identity that would keep her safe from the enemies Task Force Crimson had made during their classified operations. But in this moment, under the California sun with dozens of Marines watching, her true identity was being exposed to people who had the knowledge and authority to understand exactly what they were seeing. Colonel Hayes's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "Where did you serve to earn this?" The question carried the weight of someone who understood that presidential unit citations were not awarded for routine military service, but for acts of heroism that often remained classified for decades. Elena met the colonel's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had faced far more dangerous situations than a uniform inspection. For a moment, the supply clerk facade completely disappeared, replaced by the bearing of an elite operative who had completed missions that officially never happened. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that had been carefully hidden for 18 months. "That information is classified at levels that require specific authorization to discuss, ma'am." Elena's response was textbook, acknowledging the question while refusing to provide details that could compromise operational security. It was the answer of someone who had been trained to protect classified information, even under direct questioning from superior officers. The implication was clear to everyone present. Elena Vasquez was not the unremarkable supply clerk she appeared to be. The presidential unit citation on her skin marked her as a member of an elite unit, whose actions had earned the highest possible recognition from the United States government. The fact that such a unit was not listed in her official service record suggested that her true military background was classified at levels that most of the Marines present had never encountered. Staff Sergeant Coleman felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place as he watched the exchange. The subtle signs he had noticed over the past months, Elena's advanced physical conditioning, her tactical awareness, the inconsistencies in her personnel file, suddenly made perfect sense. She was not a supply clerk who had received advanced training. She was an elite operative, who had been assigned to supply duties as cover for whatever her real mission might be. Colonel Hayes carefully released Elena's undershirt, allowing the fabric to fall back into place and concealing the presidential unit citation once again. But the damage to Elena's cover was complete. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Too many people had seen the tattoo, too many questions had been raised, and too many inconsistencies had been exposed. The quiet life she had built at Camp Pendleton was effectively over. The inspection continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Elena could feel the weight of scrutiny from every Marine in the courtyard, could sense the whispered conversations that would begin the moment they were dismissed. Her carefully maintained anonymity had been shattered by a routine uniform check, and she knew that word of the presidential unit citation would spread throughout the base within hours. More concerning was the recognition she had seen in Colonel Hayes' eyes. The colonel was not just any visiting officer. She was from Marine Corps Intelligence, which meant she had access to classified personnel files and operational records that might reveal Elena's true identity. If Hayes chose to investigate further, she might uncover the truth about Task Force Crimson and the classified missions that had earned Elena her presidential unit citation. As the inspection concluded and the Marines were dismissed, Elena remained in formation until specifically released. She moved through the remaining afternoon duties with mechanical precision, but her mind was already working through contingency plans that she had hoped never to implement. The enemies who wanted Task Force Crimson members dead had spent 2 years searching for survivors, and Elena's exposure during the uniform inspection might have given them the lead they needed. That evening, Elena sat alone in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the small mirror mounted above her sink. For 18 months, she had seen the face of Elena Vasquez, supply clerk, looking back at her. But now she saw the face of someone whose cover had been blown, whose carefully constructed new life was crumbling around her. The presidential unit citation hidden beneath her clothing felt like it was burning against her skin, a permanent reminder of the service that had earned her both the highest honors and the most dangerous enemies. She opened her laptop and began composing a coded message to her handler. The one person who knew Elena Vasquez was actually Sarah Chen, former Sergeant First Class of Task Force Crimson. The message was brief but urgent. Package compromised. Require immediate consultation. Authorization Delta 77. As she waited for a response, Elena began mentally preparing for the possibility that her time at Camp Pendleton was coming to an end. The presidential unit citation on her skin had marked her as someone extraordinary. But extraordinary people attracted the kind of attention that could get them killed. She had spent 2 years learning to be ordinary, but as she touched the tattoo beneath her shirt, she wondered if she would remember how to be extraordinary when the time came. The response from her handler arrived within an hour. Understood. Maintain current position. Assessment team en route. Do not initiate any defensive measures without authorization. Elena closed the laptop and lay back on her narrow military cot, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and possibly new threats to the life she had built. But tonight, she was still Elena Vasquez, supply clerk, living in Building 47 at Camp Pendleton. The presidential unit citation on her skin told a different story, one of heroism, sacrifice, and service to country that had come at a price she was still paying. As she drifted off to sleep, Elena wondered if the woman who had earned that tattoo was someone she would need to become again, and whether the quiet life she had grown to love was worth fighting to preserve. The base settled into its nighttime routine around her, unaware that one of the most decorated and dangerous Marines in recent history was sleeping in quarters meant for ordinary personnel. The presidential unit citation remained hidden beneath regulation sleepwear, its gold-flecked ink waiting for the next moment when it would be called upon to reveal the truth about who Elena Vasquez really was. In the morning, everything would be different, but for now, in the quiet darkness of her quarters, Elena allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be ordinary, knowing that such moments might become increasingly rare in the days ahead. The presidential unit citation on her skin was both a mark of honor and a target on her back, and tomorrow would determine which of those identities would define her future. The assessment team arrived at Camp Pendleton under the cover of a routine administrative audit. 3 individuals in civilian clothing presented credentials to the base commander that granted them unprecedented access to personnel files and facilities. Their leader, Agent Catherine Morrison, possessed the kind of security clearance that made even senior officers defer to her authority without question. Elena recognized the signs immediately when she spotted the team during her morning supply run. The way they moved through the base with purposeful efficiency, the discreet communication devices they wore, and, most tellingly, their systematic observation of personnel and facilities suggested they were conducting threat assessments rather than administrative reviews. Her handler had mentioned an assessment team, but seeing them in person confirmed that her situation had escalated beyond routine damage control. Agent Morrison was a 20-year veteran of military intelligence, whose specialty was managing compromised assets in the field. She had built her reputation on successfully extracting or relocating operatives whose covers had been blown, often under hostile conditions. Her presence at Camp Pendleton meant that Elena's exposure during the uniform inspection had triggered protocols reserved for the most sensitive security breaches. The team's first priority was determining exactly who had witnessed the presidential unit citation and what they understood about its significance. Colonel Hayes had been debriefed immediately upon her return to Marine Corps headquarters, and her report had set off alarm bells throughout the intelligence community. A presidential unit citation tattooed with classified ink could only belong to a member of a black operations unit, and the existence of such an operative at Camp Pendleton raised questions that demanded immediate answers. Elena continued her regular duties while aware that every move was being observed and analyzed. The assessment team had positioned themselves throughout the base in ways that allowed them to monitor her interactions with other personnel while gathering intelligence about potential security breaches. She could feel their scrutiny like a physical presence, but her training had prepared her for exactly this kind of surveillance. Staff Sergeant Coleman found himself unexpectedly called to the base commander's office for what was described as a routine interview regarding personnel under his supervision. The civilian conducting the interview introduced herself as a management consultant conducting efficiency reviews, but Coleman's experience immediately identified her as intelligence personnel. Her questions were too specific, too focused on Elena's behavior patterns and capabilities, to be part of any routine evaluation. During the interview, Coleman confirmed many of the observations he had made over the previous months. Elena's advanced physical conditioning, her tactical awareness, the inconsistencies between her official duties and her apparent capabilities. He described her as competent but unremarkable, though he privately suspected there was much more to her background than appeared in her personnel file. The interviewer's reaction to his assessment suggested that his suspicions were more accurate than he had realized. The other Marines who had witnessed the uniform inspection were similarly interviewed under various pretexts. Each conversation was carefully structured to determine what they had seen, what they understood about its significance, and whether they had discussed the incident with anyone else. The assessment team was particularly interested in whether any of the Marines had attempted to research presidential unit citations, or had made connections between Elena's tattoo and classified military operations. Private Jennifer Walsh had been standing directly behind Elena during the inspection and had the clearest view of the presidential unit citation when it was exposed. During her interview, she described the tattoo in detail, noting the gold flecks that had become visible in the sunlight and the precision of the design that suggested professional military work. Her curiosity about the incident had led her to search online for information about presidential unit citations, though she had found only general information about the award's significance. The assessment team's investigation revealed that word of the incident had spread throughout the base more quickly than anticipated. Military personnel were naturally curious about unusual occurrences, and the dramatic revelation of Elena's tattoo had generated exactly the kind of attention that compromised operatives tried to avoid. Marines throughout Camp Pendleton were discussing the incident, speculating about Elena's background, and asking questions that could attract the attention of hostile intelligence services. Agent Morrison reviewed the assessment team's findings with growing concern. Elena's cover had not simply been damaged, it had been completely destroyed. The presidential unit citation was too distinctive, too significant, and too well documented for Elena to maintain her identity as an ordinary supply clerk. More concerning was the possibility that hostile forces monitoring military communications might have intercepted reports about the incident and could be moving to exploit the intelligence breakthrough. The decision to relocate Elena was made within 48 hours of the assessment team's arrival. Agent Morrison presented Elena with a relocation package that included new identity documents, assignment to a classified facility, and complete severance from her current life at Camp Pendleton. The offer was comprehensive and immediate, designed to extract Elena from her compromised position before hostile forces could act on the intelligence they might have gathered. But Elena surprised Agent Morrison by refusing the relocation offer. After 2 years of hiding, after 18 months of building relationships and finding peace in ordinary military life, she was unwilling to abandon the people and place that had become her home. The presidential unit citation on her skin represented extraordinary service to her country, but it had also cost her everything she had valued about normal life. She was determined not to let it take away the family she had found at Camp Pendleton. Her refusal created a complex problem for the intelligence community. Elena possessed classified knowledge that could compromise ongoing operations if she fell into hostile hands. Her training and capabilities made her a high-value target for enemy intelligence services. Most critically, her presence at Camp Pendleton now posed a threat to the other personnel who could become collateral damage if hostile forces attempted to capture or eliminate her. Agent Morrison explained the strategic situation with brutal clarity. Intelligence analysts had identified at least 3 foreign intelligence services that were actively hunting for survivors of Task Force Crimson. The unit's classified operations had disrupted terrorist networks, prevented weapons of mass destruction from reaching hostile governments, and eliminated threats that could have destabilized entire regions. The enemies they had made during those operations would stop at nothing to capture surviving members for interrogation or elimination. Elena's exposure at Camp Pendleton had created a window of vulnerability that hostile forces would certainly attempt to exploit. Her refusal to accept relocation meant that she was choosing to make her stand at a military base filled with Marines who had no knowledge of the danger their presence represented. Agent Morrison made it clear that the intelligence community could not provide protection for Elena if she insisted on remaining in her current position. The conversation took place in a secure conference room that had been swept for surveillance devices and equipped with signal-blocking technology. Elena sat across from Agent Morrison, listening to arguments she had heard before during her extraction from Task Force Crimson's final mission. The intelligence community's solution to compromised operatives was always the same: disappear, relocate, assume a new identity, and hope that anonymity would provide protection. But Elena had learned something during her 18 months at Camp Pendleton that the intelligence community didn't understand. She had discovered that belonging to a community, being valued for who she was rather than what she had accomplished, and finding purpose in ordinary service were worth fighting to preserve. The presidential unit citation on her skin represented extraordinary sacrifice, but it didn't have to define the rest of her life. Elena's response was measured, but firm. She would not abandon Camp Pendleton or the Marines who had become her family. If hostile forces wanted to threaten the base, she would use her training and capabilities to protect it. The presidential unit citation had been earned through acts of heroism in defense of others, and she was prepared to honor that legacy by standing her ground rather than running away. Agent Morrison warned Elena that her decision would have consequences beyond her personal safety. The intelligence community could not officially acknowledge her presence at Camp Pendleton or provide support for defensive operations. Elena would be on her own, facing enemies with significant resources and capabilities, while trying to protect people who had no understanding of the danger they faced. The meeting concluded with Agent Morrison providing Elena with intelligence briefings about the threats she might face. 3 separate hostile organizations have been tracking survivors of Task Force Crimson, using sophisticated surveillance networks and significant financial resources. Their methods ranged from subtle infiltration and intelligence gathering to direct action operations designed to capture or eliminate targets. Elena's exposure during the uniform inspection had likely provided them with the breakthrough they needed to locate her. As the assessment team prepared to leave Camp Pendleton, Agent Morrison made one final attempt to convince Elena to accept relocation. The intelligence community had invested years of training and resources in her development as an operative. Her knowledge and capabilities represented a strategic asset that could not be easily replaced. Allowing her to remain in a compromised position went against every protocol designed to protect valuable intelligence assets. Elena's response reflected the transformation she had undergone during her time at Camp Pendleton. She was no longer just an intelligence asset or a classified operative. She was a Marine who had found a home in a family worth protecting. The presidential unit citation on her skin reminded her that extraordinary service sometimes required personal sacrifice, and she was prepared to make that sacrifice to protect the people and place she had grown to love. The assessment team departed Camp Pendleton with a classified report that would generate significant debate within the intelligence community. Elena Vasquez had refused extraction and relocation, choosing instead to remain in a compromised position while facing threats that could endanger both herself and the Marines around her. Her decision represented either remarkable courage or dangerous recklessness, depending on one's perspective. Elena returned to her regular duties with the knowledge that her situation had fundamentally changed. The quiet anonymity she had enjoyed for 18 months was gone, replaced by the constant awareness that hostile forces might be closing in on her location. The presidential unit citation beneath her uniform felt heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of protecting others while managing threats that they couldn't understand. Staff Sergeant Coleman noticed the change in Elena's behavior immediately. Her movements had become more purposeful, her awareness more acute, and her responses more measured. The woman who had seemed content with routine supply duties now carried herself with the bearing of someone preparing for conflict. When he attempted to engage her in conversation about the assessment team's visit, Elena's responses were polite but carefully controlled, revealing nothing about the discussions that had taken place. The base commander, Colonel James Hartwell, had been briefed on the general nature of the security review but was not provided with specific details about Elena's background or the threats she might face. His instructions were to maintain normal operations while remaining alert for any unusual activities or security concerns. The vague nature of the briefing left him with more questions than answers, but his experience taught him that some information was classified for good reasons. Elena began implementing subtle security measures that wouldn't attract attention from her fellow Marines. She varied her daily routines, identified additional escape routes from key locations, and established communication protocols that would allow her to request assistance if needed. Her training had included extensive instruction in defensive operations while maintaining civilian cover, and she drew on that knowledge to prepare for threats that might materialize without warning. The other Marines continued their regular duties, unaware that their supply clerk was actually an elite operative whose presence might have made them targets for hostile intelligence services. Elena watched them go about their daily routines with a mixture of affection and concern, knowing that their safety now depended on her ability to identify and neutralize threats before they could act. Private Walsh approached Elena during the evening meal, curious about the assessment team's visit and the interviews that had been conducted. Her questions were innocent but persistent, reflecting the natural curiosity that had led her to research presidential unit citations after witnessing the uniform inspection. Elena's responses were carefully neutral, providing no additional information while not discouraging Walsh's interest in military history and traditions. The conversation reminded Elena of how much her presence at Camp Pendleton had changed the lives of the Marines around her. They had grown to depend on her competence and reliability, seeing her as a steady presence who could be counted on to handle difficult situations. The idea that her past might put them in danger was almost unbearable, but abandoning them would have been worse. That night, Elena received an encrypted communication from an unknown source. The message was brief but chilling. Silver Eagle confirmed. Target acquired. Debts must be paid. The reference to Silver Eagle was a code name that had been used during Task Force Crimson's operations, known only to unit members and the enemies they had fought. Someone with detailed knowledge of classified operations was making contact, and their intentions were clearly hostile. Elena deleted the message immediately but knew that its receipt confirmed her worst fears. Hostile forces had not only located her, but were confident enough in their intelligence to make direct contact. The presidential unit citation that had been exposed during the uniform inspection had provided them with the confirmation they needed to move from surveillance to active operations. She spent the remainder of the night reviewing contingency plans and preparing for the possibility that Camp Pendleton might become a battlefield. Her training had prepared her for defensive operations in hostile territory, but protecting a military base filled with Marines who were unaware of the threat they faced would require capabilities and resources she wasn't certain she possessed. The presidential unit citation on her skin seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, reminding her of the extraordinary service that had earned both honor and enemies. Elena touched the tattoo through her uniform, feeling the weight of decisions that would determine not only her own survival, but the safety of everyone at Camp Pendleton. Dawn was still hours away when Elena made her decision. She would not run from the threats that her past had created. She would not abandon the Marines who had become her family, Instead, she would use every skill Task Force Crimson had taught her to protect Camp Pendleton and the people who called it home. The Presidential Unit Citation represented extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming odds, and Elena was prepared to honor that legacy one more time. The encrypted communication device in her quarters chimed with another message. Reinforcements en route. Perimeter established. No escape possible. Elena read the message twice before deleting it, understanding that hostile forces were moving into position around Camp Pendleton. The quiet life she had built as a supply clerk was about to end, but the warrior she had been trained to be was ready to emerge. She opened her footlocker and retrieved items that had been carefully hidden beneath ordinary military gear: a secure communication device, encrypted data storage, and emergency contact protocols that connected her to resources the assessment team hadn't mentioned. Elena Vasquez might have been abandoned by the intelligence community, but Sarah Chen still had allies who remembered what Task Force Crimson had accomplished. As the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, Elena prepared to face enemies who had spent 2 years planning their revenge. The Presidential Unit Citation on her skin had marked her as someone extraordinary, and extraordinary people were expected to do extraordinary things when ordinary people needed protection. Camp Pendleton was about to discover exactly what kind of Marine had been working in their supply office, and the world was about to learn that some warriors never truly retire. The final phase of her quiet life was ending, but Elena felt a sense of relief rather than fear. Hiding had never suited her, and protecting others was what she had been trained to do. The Presidential Unit Citation beneath her uniform represented the highest level of military service, and she was about to demonstrate why such honors were earned rather than given. Elena checked her equipment one final time, then stepped outside her quarters to begin what might be the most important mission of her career. Camp Pendleton slept peacefully around her, unaware that their supply clerk was preparing to wage war against enemies who had made the mistake of threatening her family. The Presidential Unit Citation on her skin would guide her through whatever came next, just as it had guided her through every impossible mission Task Force Crimson had ever undertaken. The attack came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, when Camp Pendleton was at its most vulnerable. Elena had been monitoring communications from her quarters when the perimeter alarms began sounding across the base. The hostile forces had chosen their timing perfectly, striking during the shift change when guard rotations were transitioning and response protocols were at their weakest point. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, securing her quarters and activating the emergency communication device she had kept hidden for 2 years. The response was immediate, connecting her to a voice she recognized from Task Force Crimson's operational days. Commander Jake Morrison, no relation to Agent Catherine Morrison, had been their liaison during the unit's most classified missions. His presence on the emergency channel meant that Elena's situation had escalated to the highest levels of military command. The perimeter breach occurred simultaneously at 3 points around Camp Pendleton's eastern boundary. Hostile operatives moved with military precision, using advanced equipment to neutralize security systems while avoiding detection by standard surveillance methods. Their objective was clear: penetrate the base defenses, locate and capture Elena Vasquez, and extract her for interrogation before military response forces could intervene. Commander Morrison's intelligence briefing was delivered in rapid professional terms that reminded Elena of pre-mission preparations from her Task Force Crimson days. 12 hostile operatives had been identified through satellite surveillance, equipped with military-grade weapons and supported by external coordination from unknown sources. Their leader was confirmed to be Viktor Kozlov, a former Spetsnaz operator whose mercenary organization specialized in capturing high-value targets for foreign intelligence services. Elena knew Kozlov by reputation from classified briefings during her operational years. He had been hunting Task Force Crimson members since the unit's disbandment, using information obtained from compromised intelligence sources to track down survivors of the classified missions that had disrupted his employer's operations. His presence at Camp Pendleton meant that this was not a simple revenge operation, but a sophisticated intelligence-gathering mission designed to extract classified information about Task Force Crimson's activities. The base's emergency response protocols activated automatically, but Elena understood that standard military procedures would be insufficient against opponents with Kozlov's capabilities. She needed to reach the base commander and provide tactical intelligence that could prevent the hostile forces from achieving their objectives. More importantly, she needed to ensure that the Marines at Camp Pendleton understood the nature of the threat they were facing. Colonel Hartwell was in the command center coordinating defensive operations when Elena arrived with information that transformed his understanding of the situation. Her briefing was concise but comprehensive, identifying the attackers as professional mercenaries with specific intelligence about base layout and security procedures. The attack was not a terrorist incident or training accident, but a targeted operation designed to capture a specific individual. The revelation that Elena Vasquez was actually a classified operative whose presence had drawn hostile forces to Camp Pendleton created immediate tactical complications. Colonel Hartwell's first instinct was to isolate Elena and prevent her from becoming a liability during defensive operations. But Elena's intelligence about the attacker's capabilities and objectives made her the most valuable resource available for protecting the base. Staff Sergeant Coleman joined the command center briefing with tactical assessments from perimeter teams. His reports confirmed Elena's analysis. The hostile forces were moving with professional precision toward specific objectives rather than conducting random attacks. Their equipment included advanced night vision systems, encrypted communications, and weapons designed for close-quarters combat in military facilities. Elena's transformation from supply clerk to tactical advisor was immediate and complete. The careful anonymity she had maintained for 18 months disappeared as she provided detailed intelligence about mercenary tactics, equipment capabilities, and likely operational objectives. Her knowledge of hostile forces' methods came from years of fighting similar opponents during Task Force Crimson's classified missions. The presidential unit citation beneath her uniform seemed to radiate authority as Elena took control of defensive planning. Colonel Hartwell found himself deferring to her expertise despite the irregularity of receiving tactical advice from someone officially classified as support personnel. Elena's recommendations were precise and actionable, based on combat experience that few Marines at Camp Pendleton could match. The first engagement occurred near Building 47, where Elena had worked for 18 months as a supply clerk. Hostile operatives had identified the building as her primary duty station and were conducting systematic searches for intelligence about her activities and associations. The Marine security team assigned to defend the area found themselves facing opponents with superior equipment and advanced tactical training. Elena monitored the engagement from the command center, providing real-time intelligence about hostile tactics and recommending countermeasures based on her knowledge of mercenary operations. Her analysis proved accurate as the hostile forces demonstrated exactly the capabilities and limitations she had predicted. But the Marines defending Building 47 were taking casualties against opponents they were not equipped to handle. The decision to deploy Elena in a combat role violated every protocol for protecting classified operatives, but Colonel Hartwell recognized that conventional defensive measures were failing against Kozlov's professional mercenaries. Elena's combat capabilities represented the base's best chance of neutralizing the threat while minimizing casualties among the Marines under his command. Elena's preparation for combat was methodical and efficient. She exchanged her supply clerk uniform for tactical gear that had been stored in secure facilities since her arrival at Camp Pendleton. The transformation was remarkable. The quiet, unassuming woman who had managed inventory reports became an elite operative whose bearing and equipment reflected years of classified training and operational experience. The presidential unit citation was no longer hidden beneath regulation clothing, but visible on tactical gear, designed to accommodate the tattoo while providing maximum protection and mobility. The gold-flecked ink seemed to gleam with inner fire, as Elena prepared to honor the extraordinary service it represented through actions that would protect the Marines who had become her family. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through Elena's tactical communication system as she moved toward the first engagement zone. Intelligence updates indicated that hostile forces were converging on Building 47, with equipment designed for breaching fortified positions and extracting high-value targets. Kozlov himself was directing operations from a mobile command post established outside the base perimeter. Elena's approach to the engagement demonstrated capabilities that few Marines at Camp Pendleton had ever witnessed. She moved with silent precision through terrain she had memorized during 18 months of routine duties, using knowledge of base layout and defensive positions to outmaneuver opponents who relied on stolen intelligence and surveillance data. The hostile operatives near Building 47 had superior equipment and tactical training, but they lacked Elena's intimate knowledge of the environment and her years of experience fighting similar opponents. Her first contact with the mercenaries was decisive. 3 hostile operatives neutralized with surgical precision before they understood that their target had become their hunter. Staff Sergeant Coleman monitored Elena's progress from the command center, watching tactical displays that showed the systematic elimination of hostile forces around Building 47. The woman he had suspected of concealing advanced military training was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything in conventional Marine Corps programs. Her movements were those of an elite operative whose skills had been refined through combat operations at the highest levels of military service. The engagement at Building 47 concluded within 20 minutes of Elena's arrival. 7 hostile operatives had been neutralized, their advanced equipment captured, and their intelligence-gathering objectives completely frustrated. Elena's tactical communication with the command center was professional and concise, reporting mission success while requesting updated intelligence about remaining hostile forces. But Kozlov's operation included contingencies for the possibility that their target might resist capture. Intelligence intercepts revealed that the mercenary leader was implementing secondary objectives designed to force Elena into the open through threats against the Marines she had worked alongside for 18 months. The presidential unit citation that marked her as extraordinary also marked her as someone who would sacrifice herself to protect others. Private Walsh and 3 other Marines from Elena's supply unit had been captured during the initial assault and were being held at a location outside the base perimeter. Kozlov's demands were transmitted through encrypted channels. Elena would surrender herself in exchange for the Marines' release, or the hostages would be eliminated as examples of the consequences of harboring classified operatives. The tactical situation presented Elena with the kind of impossible choice that Task Force Crimson had been created to resolve. Surrendering to Kozlov would result in her own death and the compromise of classified information that could endanger ongoing operations. But allowing the Marines to be executed would violate every principle that had earned her the Presidential Unit Citation. Colonel Hartwell's command decision reflected his growing understanding of Elena's capabilities and the strategic importance of protecting both her and the captured Marines. He authorized a rescue operation that would officially be conducted by base security forces, but would actually rely on Elena's combat skills and tactical knowledge to succeed against professional opponents. Elena's mission planning drew on every aspect of her Task Force Crimson training. The hostage location had been identified through signal intelligence, but approaching it would require penetrating defensive positions established by mercenaries who expected exactly such an attempt. Her tactical advantages included superior knowledge of local terrain, support from Camp Pendleton's resources, and combat experience against similar opponents. Commander Morrison provided real-time intelligence support as Elena moved toward the hostage location. Satellite surveillance revealed that Kozlov had positioned his forces to defend against conventional military assault while maintaining the capability to eliminate hostages if negotiations failed. The mercenary leader's tactical planning was sophisticated and professional, reflecting his years of experience conducting similar operations. Elena's approach to the hostage rescue demonstrated why Task Force Crimson had been considered the military's most elite unit. She penetrated the mercenaries' perimeter defenses without detection, neutralized guard positions with silent efficiency, and reached the hostage location before Kozlov's forces understood that their positions were being systematically compromised. The rescue operation required split-second timing and absolute precision. Elena had to neutralize the guards holding Private Walsh and the other Marines, while preventing any of the hostages from being harmed during the engagement. Her training included extensive practice in exactly such scenarios, but the stakes were intensely personal given her relationship with the Marines she was attempting to save. Private Walsh's first sight of Elena in full tactical gear was a revelation that completed her understanding of the uniform inspection incident. The Presidential Unit Citation visible on Elena's equipment confirmed that she was not just an experienced Marine, but an elite operative whose capabilities exceeded anything Walsh had imagined. The quiet supply clerk who had managed inventory reports was revealed as someone whose service had earned the highest possible military recognition. The hostage rescue succeeded with the systematic elimination of 8 mercenaries and the safe extraction of all 4 Marines. Elena's tactical performance was flawless, demonstrating capabilities that validated every aspect of her Presidential Unit Citation while protecting the people who had become her family at Camp Pendleton. But Kozlov himself remained at large, along with enough operatives to continue threatening the base and its personnel. The final confrontation occurred at dawn as Elena tracked Kozlov to his mobile command post. The mercenary leader had withdrawn from his assault on Camp Pendleton but had not abandoned his objective of capturing the Task Force Crimson survivor. His equipment included advanced surveillance systems and weapons designed for eliminating elite operatives, reflecting his understanding of the capabilities he was facing. Elena's approach to the command post demonstrated every skill that had made Task Force Crimson legendary among classified operations units. She moved with silent precision through terrain that offered minimal cover, neutralized security systems that should have detected any approach, and reached engagement range before Kozlov understood that he had become the target rather than the hunter. The confrontation between Elena and Kozlov was brief but decisive. Years of hunting Task Force Crimson survivors had given the mercenary leader detailed intelligence about their training and capabilities, but he had underestimated the personal motivation that drove Elena to protect the Marines at Camp Pendleton. Her tactical performance was enhanced by fighting for people she cared about rather than abstract strategic objectives. Kozlov's elimination ended the immediate threat to Camp Pendleton, but Elena understood that other hostile forces would eventually learn of her location and capabilities. The Presidential Unit citation on her tactical gear marked her as a permanent target for enemies who sought revenge against Task Force Crimson's operations. Her choice to remain at the base meant accepting the responsibility of protecting it against future threats. Colonel Hartwell's after-action briefing acknowledged Elena's extraordinary service while maintaining the operational security required for classified personnel. The official record would describe the incident as a terrorist attack repelled by base security forces, with no mention of Elena's true identity or the specialized capabilities she had demonstrated. The Presidential Unit citation would remain a classified element of her service record. Staff Sergeant Coleman's perspective on Elena had been transformed by witnessing her combat performance. The woman he had suspected of concealing advanced training had revealed herself as one of the military's most elite operatives, whose quiet service in the supply office represented a commitment to ordinary duty despite extraordinary capabilities. His respect for her was now matched by understanding of the sacrifices she had made to find peace in routine military life. Private Walsh and the other rescued Marines were debriefed about their capture and rescue, but they were instructed to maintain operational security about the specific details of their experience. They understood that Elena's true identity and capabilities were classified information that could endanger both her and Camp Pendleton if disclosed to unauthorized personnel. Elena returned to her quarters as the sun rose over Camp Pendleton, exhausted but satisfied that the immediate threat had been neutralized. The Presidential Unit citation on her skin felt lighter now, its weight balanced by the knowledge that she had successfully protected the Marines who had become her family. The extraordinary service it represented had been honored through actions rather than recognition. Commander Morrison's final communication confirmed that Elena's security status had been upgraded to reflect the new threats she might face. Resources would be provided to enhance Camp Pendleton's defensive capabilities, and intelligence monitoring would continue to identify potential hostile operations before they could threaten the base. Elena's decision to remain rather than accept relocation had been validated by her successful defense of the Marines under her protection. The base resumed normal operations with subtle but significant changes in security procedures. Elena returned to her duties as a supply clerk, but her colleagues now understood that their quiet, competent co-worker possessed capabilities that extended far beyond inventory management. The Presidential Unit citation remained hidden beneath her regulation uniform, but its significance was no longer secret to those who had witnessed her extraordinary service. Staff Sergeant Coleman approached Elena during the evening meal, his manner reflecting the respect and understanding that had replaced his earlier curiosity about her background. His conversation was carefully neutral, acknowledging her service without discussing classified details. Elena appreciated his discretion, while recognizing that their relationship had been fundamentally changed by the revelations of the past few days. Private Walsh's interaction with Elena was more direct, expressing gratitude for the rescue, while asking questions about military service that reflected her new understanding of what was possible through dedication and training. Elena's responses encouraged Walsh's interest in advancing her own military career while maintaining operational security about classified programs and capabilities. Elena's evening routine included a secure communication with Commander Morrison, updating him on base security status and her assessment of ongoing threats. The Presidential Unit citation had drawn hostile attention that would continue as long as enemies of Task Force Crimson sought revenge against surviving members. Elena's commitment to protecting Camp Pendleton meant accepting responsibility for managing those threats indefinitely. The transformation from supply clerk to acknowledged elite operative had been completed, but Elena found that her fundamental motivations remained unchanged. She valued the relationships she had built with the Marines at Camp Pendleton and was committed to protecting the community that had given her purpose and belonging. The Presidential Unit Citation represented extraordinary service in defense of others, and she was prepared to honor that legacy through continued vigilance and dedication. Colonel Hartwell's private conversation with Elena addressed the long-term implications of her decision to remain at Camp Pendleton. Her presence would continue to attract attention from hostile forces, but her capabilities also represented a significant enhancement to the base's security and defensive readiness. The arrangement would continue as long as Elena was willing to balance her official duties with the unofficial responsibility of protecting the base against specialized threats. Elena's reflection on the events of the past week confirmed her decision to reject relocation and fight for the life she had built at Camp Pendleton. The Presidential Unit Citation on her skin had been earned through extraordinary service, but it had also cost her the normal life that most people took for granted. Finding peace and purpose among the Marines at Camp Pendleton had restored something she had thought was lost forever. The gold-flecked ink of her Presidential Unit Citation caught the light as Elena prepared for sleep, reminding her of the ceremony where it had been applied, and the unit members who had earned it alongside her. Most of those Marines were gone now, casualties of the classified operations that had saved countless lives while destroying the operators who conducted them. Elena's survival carried the responsibility of honoring their memory through continued service. Camp Pendleton settled into its nighttime routine around her, but Elena's awareness remained heightened by the knowledge that future threats would come. The Presidential Unit Citation marked her as someone extraordinary, and extraordinary people attracted extraordinary dangers. But they also had extraordinary capabilities for protecting the people and places they cared about. Elena's final communication of the day was a coded message to surviving contacts from Task Force Crimson's support network. Her successful defense of Camp Pendleton would send a message to hostile forces that some targets were better left alone. The Presidential Unit Citation represented more than past service. It represented ongoing commitment to the principles that had earned such recognition. As sleep finally came, Elena felt the satisfaction of having chosen correctly when faced with impossible decisions. The Presidential Unit Citation on her skin would always mark her as a target for enemies seeking revenge against Task Force Crimson's operations. But it also marked her as someone capable of protecting the people who mattered to her, and that was a responsibility she was proud to carry. The quiet life she had sought as a supply clerk would never be entirely possible again, but the meaningful life she had found protecting her military family was worth any sacrifice. Elena Vasquez would continue her duties at Camp Pendleton, managing supplies and maintaining equipment, while remaining ready to defend against threats that only she could recognize and neutralize. The Presidential Unit Citation beneath her uniform told a story of extraordinary service that had earned both honor and enemies. But Elena had learned that the greatest honor came not from recognition, but from using extraordinary capabilities to protect ordinary people who deserved to live without fear. That mission would continue as long as she drew breath, guided by the principles that had earned her the highest recognition her country could bestow. The weeks following the attack on Camp Pendleton brought a new rhythm to Elena's life that blended her official duties with the unofficial responsibility of base security. Colonel Hartwell had quietly restructured her assignment to include liaison duties with visiting personnel, giving her legitimate access to intelligence briefings and security assessments that would help her identify potential threats before they could materialize into active operations against the base. Elena's morning routine now included encrypted communications with Commander Morrison's intelligence network, reviewing overnight reports from surveillance assets positioned around Camp Pendleton's perimeter. The Presidential Unit Citation beneath her uniform had become more than a symbol of past service. It represented her ongoing commitment to protecting the Marines who had welcomed her into their community despite the dangers her presence might bring. Staff Sergeant Coleman had become Elena's primary liaison with base security forces, his experience and judgment making him an ideal bridge between conventional military operations and the specialized threats that Elena's background might attract. Their morning briefings covered routine security matters, but Coleman's questions often revealed his growing understanding of the sophisticated dangers that existed beyond normal military experience. The relationship between Elena and the Marines under her unofficial protection had evolved into something resembling a family dynamic, with Elena serving as both colleague and guardian. Private Walsh had thrown herself into advanced training programs, inspired by Elena's example to pursue capabilities that would make her a more effective Marine. The other rescued hostages had similarly dedicated themselves to excellence, understanding that their survival had come at a cost that demanded their best efforts in return. Elena's work in the supply office continued with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized her first 18 months at Camp Pendleton, but her colleagues now understood that her competence extended far beyond inventory management. When equipment malfunctioned or supplies went missing, Elena's solutions often reflected tactical thinking and operational experience that transcended typical administrative procedures. The base's defensive preparations had been enhanced through Elena's recommendations, implemented through official channels but based on her intimate knowledge of how sophisticated hostile forces operated. Perimeter surveillance had been upgraded, communication protocols had been strengthened, and response procedures had been refined to address threats that conventional military training rarely encountered. Commander Morrison's monthly visits to Camp Pendleton provided Elena with intelligence updates about ongoing threats while maintaining the operational security necessary for her continued presence at the base. Their meetings took place in secure facilities that had been established specifically for classified briefings, with participation limited to personnel who possessed appropriate clearances and demonstrated need to know. During one such briefing, Commander Morrison revealed that Elena's successful defense of Camp Pendleton had generated significant interest within the intelligence community. Several classified programs were being developed that would benefit from her expertise, but all such opportunities required relocation to facilities with higher security classifications than Camp Pendleton could provide. Elena's response was consistent with her previous decisions. She valued her life at Camp Pendleton more than any career advancement or professional recognition. The presidential unit citation on her skin reminded her that extraordinary service often required personal sacrifice, and she had already made the sacrifice of a conventional military career in exchange for the relationships and purpose she had found among the Marines at the base. The intelligence briefing also included warnings about new threats that might emerge as hostile forces adapted to Elena's capabilities and defensive preparations. Kozlov's organization had been neutralized, but other mercenary groups and foreign intelligence services continued to seek information about Task Force Crimson's operations. Elena's exposure during the uniform inspection had confirmed her survival to enemies who had spent years believing all unit members were dead. Elena's tactical assessment of future threats was thorough and professional, drawing on her operational experience to predict how hostile forces might adapt their methods to overcome the defensive measures now protecting Camp Pendleton. Her recommendations included enhanced surveillance capabilities, improved communication security, and specialized training for base personnel who might encounter sophisticated opponents. The conversation with Commander Morrison also addressed the long-term sustainability of Elena's situation at Camp Pendleton. Her presence provided significant security benefits, but it also represented an ongoing liability that could escalate without warning. The intelligence community preferred solutions that eliminated variables, rather than managing them indefinitely. But Elena's demonstrated capabilities and commitment to the base made relocation an increasingly difficult option to justify. Elena's response reflected her mature understanding of the strategic situation. She acknowledged the risks while emphasizing the benefits her presence provided to Camp Pendleton and its personnel. The presidential unit citation represented more than individual recognition. It symbolized the collective service of Task Force Crimson and the ongoing responsibility to protect those who deserved safety and security. Private Walsh's development under Elena's informal mentorship had become a source of particular satisfaction. The young Marine's enthusiasm for advanced training was matched by genuine aptitude for tactical thinking and operational planning. Elena saw in Walsh the potential for extraordinary service, guided by the same principles that had motivated Task Force Crimson's missions. Elena's training sessions with Walsh took place during off-duty hours, focusing on skills that would enhance her effectiveness as a Marine while maintaining operational security about classified capabilities. The lessons covered tactical awareness, equipment proficiency, and leadership development, all presented within the context of conventional military training rather than specialized operations. Walsh's questions often revealed her growing understanding of the complexities involved in protecting others, while managing threats they couldn't comprehend. Elena's answers emphasized the importance of dedication, preparation, and moral clarity in making decisions that could affect many lives. The presidential unit citation had been earned through such decisions, made under pressure, and with incomplete information but guided by unwavering commitment to protecting others. Staff Sergeant Coleman's role in supporting Elena's security mission had expanded to include training other Marines in threat recognition and response procedures. His sessions were carefully designed to enhance base security without revealing the specific nature of the threats they might face. Coleman's experience and credibility made him an effective instructor, while his collaboration with Elena provided him with insights that enhanced his own capabilities. The training programs developed by Coleman and Elena emphasized vigilance, communication, and coordinated response to unusual situations. Marines learned to recognize surveillance activities, report suspicious behavior, and implement security protocols that could disrupt hostile operations before they could achieve their objectives. The training was presented as routine security enhancement rather than preparation for sophisticated attacks. Elena's evening duties now included security patrols that allowed her to monitor base perimeter while maintaining her cover as supply personnel conducting routine equipment checks. Her routes were varied and unpredictable, designed to detect surveillance or infiltration attempts while appearing to follow administrative procedures. The patrols also provided opportunities for informal interaction with Marines throughout the base. During these patrols, Elena often encountered Marines who wanted to discuss the attack and their role in defending Camp Pendleton. Their questions revealed natural curiosity about the incident, mixed with pride in their successful response to a serious threat. Elena's conversations with them emphasized their effectiveness and professionalism, while maintaining operational security about the specific nature of the hostile forces they had faced. The presidential unit citation beneath Elena's uniform felt lighter during these conversations, its weight balanced by the knowledge that her service was protecting people who appreciated both her sacrifices and their own responsibilities. The extraordinary recognition represented by the tattoo was meaningful, because it enabled ordinary Marines to live and serve without fear of sophisticated threats they couldn't identify or counter on their own. Colonel Hartwell's leadership during the post-attack period had demonstrated his understanding of the complex situation Elena's presence created for Camp Pendleton. His decisions balanced operational security requirements with the need to maintain morale and effectiveness among Marines who had witnessed extraordinary events without receiving complete explanations for what they had experienced. The colonel's private meetings with Elena addressed administrative matters that supported her continued presence while managing the bureaucratic challenges created by her unique status. Official records needed to reflect her enhanced responsibilities without revealing classified information about her background or capabilities. Personnel evaluations needed to acknowledge her contributions without providing details that could compromise operational security. Elena's performance evaluations presented particular challenges because her most significant contributions could not be documented through conventional military reporting systems. Her successful defense of Camp Pendleton would never appear in official records, and her ongoing security mission could not be acknowledged in personnel files that might be reviewed by unauthorized individuals. The solution developed by Colonel Hartwell involved creating parallel documentation systems that maintained Elena's cover, while ensuring that her actual service was appropriately recognized by authorities with proper clearances. The presidential unit citation tattoo served as a permanent record of her extraordinary service, while conventional military records reflected only the routine duties that concealed her true mission. Elena's relationship with the base community had been transformed by the events of the attack, but she worked carefully to maintain the balance between acknowledgement and operational security. Marines who had witnessed her capabilities treated her with enhanced respect, but they also understood that discussing those capabilities with unauthorized personnel could endanger both Elena and the base. The transformation was most evident during communal activities like meals in the mess hall, where Elena's presence was now actively sought by Marines who valued her perspective and experience. Conversations covered topics ranging from military history to career development, with Elena providing insights that reflected her extensive experience without revealing classified information. Private Walsh had become Elena's most frequent dining companion, their conversations covering advanced military topics that challenged Walsh's understanding while expanding her knowledge of leadership and tactical thinking. Elena's teaching style emphasized questions rather than answers, encouraging Walsh to develop her own analytical capabilities rather than simply accepting information from authority figures. Elena's influence on Walsh's development was evident in the young Marine's improved performance during training exercises and her enhanced confidence in leadership situations. The Presidential Unit Citation represented the kind of extraordinary service that inspired others to excellence, and Elena took satisfaction in seeing Walsh embrace the challenges required for advanced military achievement. Staff Sergeant Coleman's collaboration with Elena had evolved into a genuine partnership that enhanced both their capabilities while maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding classified information. Coleman's conventional military expertise complemented Elena's specialized knowledge, creating a security framework that protected Camp Pendleton against both routine and sophisticated threats. Their joint planning sessions addressed scenarios ranging from conventional security challenges to the exotic threats that Elena's background might attract. Coleman's questions often pushed Elena to articulate tactical concepts in ways that could be understood and implemented by Marines without specialized training, enhancing the base's overall defensive capabilities. Elena's weapons proficiency demonstrations had become regular training events that enhanced marksmanship skills throughout the base while providing her with opportunities to assess personnel capabilities and readiness. Her instruction emphasized fundamentals rather than advanced techniques, ensuring that Marines develop solid foundations for whatever challenges they might face. The demonstrations also served as subtle recruitment tools for identifying Marines with exceptional potential who might benefit from advanced training opportunities. Elena's evaluations were shared with appropriate authorities through classified channels, contributing to talent identification programs that supported elite military units while maintaining operational security about her own background. Elena's equipment maintenance duties had expanded to include specialized systems that supported the base's enhanced security posture. Her technical expertise, gained through years of maintaining sophisticated equipment under combat conditions, made her invaluable for ensuring that defensive systems remained operational and effective. The maintenance work also provided Elena with detailed knowledge of all base systems, from communications networks to surveillance equipment, giving her comprehensive understanding of capabilities and vulnerabilities that informed her security assessments. Her recommendations for system improvements were implemented through official channels, while reflecting her insider knowledge of how such systems might be targeted or exploited. Elena's supply chain management had been restructured to include security screening procedures that could identify potential threats concealed within routine deliveries. Her experience with hostile operations included knowledge of how supply chains could be exploited for intelligence gathering or infiltration purposes, making her expertise valuable for protecting against such threats. The screening procedures were designed to appear routine while providing thorough examination of personnel, vehicles, and materials entering Camp Pendleton. Elena's involvement ensured that potential threats would be identified by someone with the training and experience necessary to recognize sophisticated deception techniques. Commander Morrison's quarterly assessments of Elena's situation included evaluations of her effectiveness, security status, and long-term prospects for continued service at Camp Pendleton. His reports acknowledged her extraordinary contributions while recommending continued support for her unique mission and the defensive capabilities she provided for the base. The assessments also addressed broader strategic questions about the wisdom of maintaining classified operatives in conventional military settings. Elena's success at Camp Pendleton had generated interest in similar arrangements at other facilities, but the specific circumstances that made her situation workable might not be replicable elsewhere. Elena's input on these strategic discussions emphasized the importance of community integration and genuine commitment to the personnel being protected. The Presidential Unit Citation represented service motivated by dedication to others rather than personal advancement, and similar arrangements would succeed only with operatives who shared that fundamental orientation. The quarterly meetings also provided Elena with opportunities to request resources or support that would enhance her effectiveness while maintaining her cover. Her requirements were minimal, reflecting her preference for simple solutions and her confidence in her own capabilities, but occasional equipment upgrades or intelligence updates proved valuable for maintaining her edge against potential threats. Elena's medical evaluations presented unique challenges because her combat experience included injuries and treatments that were not reflected in her official health records. Military medical personnel needed to understand her actual health status without receiving information about classified operations that had caused her injuries or the specialized treatments she had received. The solution involved creating sanitized medical records that documented her actual health status while attributing injuries to training accidents or routine military activities rather than combat operations. Elena's cooperation with medical personnel was essential for maintaining this deception while ensuring that she received appropriate care for ongoing health issues. Elena's fitness evaluations consistently rated her as exceptional, but the standards used to assess her performance were carefully calibrated to avoid revealing capabilities that exceeded normal military training. Her participation in base athletics provided outlets for maintaining her conditioning while reinforcing her cover as an exceptionally fit but otherwise ordinary Marine. The athletic activities also provided opportunities for informal leadership and mentoring that enhanced Elena's integration with the base community. Her coaching of younger Marines in various sports emphasized teamwork, discipline, and perseverance, values that aligned with military culture while reflecting the principles that had guided her extraordinary service. Elena's off-duty activities had been structured to support her security mission, while providing opportunities for relaxation and social interaction that maintained her psychological well-being. The balance between operational readiness and normal life was essential for sustaining her effectiveness over the long term. Her participation in base social events provided opportunities to observe personnel interactions and identify potential security concerns while demonstrating her commitment to the community she was protecting. Elena's presence at informal gatherings was welcomed by Marines who appreciated her perspectives and enjoyed her company. The presidential unit citation beneath her civilian clothing during these events served as a constant reminder of the extraordinary service that had brought her to Camp Pendleton and the ongoing responsibility she had accepted for protecting the Marines who had become her family. The recognition represented by the tattoo was less important than the relationships it had enabled and the purpose it had provided. Elena's correspondence with surviving contacts from Task Force Crimson was carefully managed to maintain operational security while preserving connections with people who understood her background and the sacrifices required for extraordinary service. These communications provided emotional support and professional consultation that enhanced her effectiveness while maintaining her psychological health. The messages were encrypted and transmitted through secure channels that protected both Elena and her correspondents from hostile surveillance. Topics covered operational updates, threat assessments, and personal matters that helped maintain connections forged through shared service in the most demanding military operations. Elena's annual evaluations reflected her dual role as supply clerk and security specialist, with official ratings that acknowledged her exceptional performance in routine duties, while classified assessments documented her extraordinary contributions to base defense and personnel protection. The Presidential Unit Citation tattoo served as authentication for the classified portions of her record. The evaluation process required careful coordination between multiple authorities to ensure that Elena's actual service was appropriately recognized without compromising operational security or revealing information that could endanger her or the base. Her continued assignment to Camp Pendleton depended on maintaining this balance indefinitely. Elena's future at Camp Pendleton remains subject to ongoing assessment, but her demonstrated value to the base community and her personal commitment to protecting her military family suggested that the arrangement would continue as long as circumstances permitted. The Presidential Unit Citation represented both past service and ongoing dedication to the principles that had earned such recognition. The tattoo beneath her uniform reminded Elena daily that extraordinary service created extraordinary responsibilities, but also extraordinary opportunities to protect and serve others who deserved safety and security. Her choice to remain at Camp Pendleton reflected her understanding that the highest form of military service was using exceptional capabilities to ensure that ordinary people could live extraordinary lives without fear. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.